Hello, everyone. My name is Matt Arant with Arant Academic Planning, and this is one of our series on boarding school admission topics. And I'm joined by two boarding school admission professionals. And the topic tonight is on post-grad years as well as reclassifying. So before we kind of dive into those specific topics, I just want our guests to introduce themselves. So Richard, do you want to go ahead and get started?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here. So my name is Richard Mahoney. I work here at Mercersburg Academy in the admissions office. This is going into my fifth year here, and fifth year in admissions as well. Previously, I was working at a boarding school in Tennessee called the Webb School. I was doing more athletic administration stuff down there. And I'm from the New England area. I went to a small boarding school in New Hampshire, and had that pleasure. So I am very familiar with the boarding school world, and I always wanted to give back to the boarding school community, and that's kind of how I found myself working at a boarding school. I feel as though I'm going to be a lifer at some sort of boarding school capacity, which is exciting. Um, but yeah.
Great. Thank you. How about you, Tanner?
Thanks, Matt. I'm Tanner Gilson. I work in the admission office at New Hampton School, in central New Hampshire, kind of in the heart of the Lakes region of the state, just at the foothills of the White Mountains. Funny enough, I grew up in the state of New Hampshire. I really didn't know this place existed. So I'm really happy to have this opportunity to work in this environment. Went to boarding school myself, did a post grad year, so a lot of what I tend to talk to families about is my own experience going through it. I am a house parent on campus. I'm an assistant football coach. So I get to do a lot of those different things outside the office, but work with our tour guides at New Hampton in the admission office. So just excited to be here and get a chance to talk about boarding school.
Yeah, so Richard, can you kind of share with us a couple minutes about Mercersburg, kind of that elevator pitch that you undoubtedly give to thousands upon thousands of folks on the road or virtually?
Yeah, sure. So, Mercersburg is a pretty small boarding school in comparison to some of our competitors. We've got about 450 students on any given year. We're located in South Central Pennsylvania. We're about 3.5 hours west of Philadelphia and about an hour and a half north of DC. Um, so I would say DC is probably the closest city that we're closest to, flying in and out for families. Um, we've got 27 different varsity athletic programs. So for the 450 kids that are here, they're participating in sports year round. Some of our top sports are swimming and squash. Our swim program competes pretty on a national level, I would say. They compete at the Easterns every year. Last year, they won it, fortunately. Our squash team as well. They compete pretty handily and on a national schedule. Um, in terms of dormitories, we've got 7 dormitories on campus, 4 girls, 4 boys dorms. So they house pretty much all of our students. Um, we are 85% boarding, so we have a pretty strong residential community. Um, yeah, that's a quick rundown of Mercersburg.
Okay. So how about New Hampton, Tanner?
Yeah, kind of gave you a little bit of the background on the location, but central New Hampshire, we're about 340 students, 80% boarding, 20% day. And I think most notably in terms of programmatically, two things that stick out are we're an IB school, one of the few schools in New England that have an IB program, International Baccalaureate program. We focus a lot on some project-based work, project-based learning. I think a feature of that is an event we do in the springtime called Project Week. So most notably known for a lot of hands-on learning opportunities. Um, and I think programmatically, what I've really enjoyed is just seeing the different programs by season really shine. I think from a fall perspective, football and soccer are two things that really stick out. But I think we are able to balance out with kids that love being outdoors and love taking on mountain biking. In the winter, I think our hockey and basketball programs have a really good foundation, and most notably in terms of those winter programs, lacrosse in the springtime. And so I went to a smaller boarding school type environment, kind of similar to New Hampton. I grew up competing against New Hampton when I was in school, in basketball and stuff like that. So to have the kind of 360 and now back in this world is kind of a unique experience.
Yeah, so I guess a little bit of background about myself. So I opened my own IEC practice. Before that, I was in the college admissions world. So I was from the Central Texas area, public school kid. So I had never heard of PG years in relation to, I guess, secondary education. When I heard of postgrad, I thought, oh, you get your bachelor's and you kind of do research after high school. It wasn't until I started working in college admissions at Franklin and Marshall in Pennsylvania, in which I heard this kind of phrase being used, especially up in the Northeast. So, because walk us through what exactly is a PG year and who typically takes these? Is there a specific kind of type of student, or is it just depending on year to year? Like, how does that look on like that post grad student?
Tanner, if you want to take this one, since you did a post grad year, I feel like you have a great understanding of who takes that and what that looks like.
Yeah, I think that the reason why I took a post grad year was pretty simple and straightforward. I don't think I was ready to go to college at 18. And getting that extra year, I think I always tell families, you know, obviously there's a lot more leaning student athletes that are looking to take the post grad year. To get an extra year, for a lot of different sports, it's to get an extra summer. We see it a lot with lacrosse kids getting a whole extra year of summer lacrosse. Football wise, it gives you that summer to get to camps, and then you get an additional 9 to 10 games of film. So I think from an athletic standpoint, it definitely leans heavier that way. There's
And
been
also just kind of getting bigger, right? Maturing those sports that
yeah,
like lacrosse and football, where you can tell watching a high school kid versus a college kid. So having that extra year of just growth and putting on weight is really crucial for some of those specific sports too.
Yeah, 100%. And so I think every kid has a different kind of why as to why they're going into it. It's funny, we've actually seen an uptick in some boys in particular who are just not ready for college, and like they're not necessarily going to pursue a college sport at the next level, but they just need that fifth year. But I always tell families like you're gonna have the opportunity to get bigger, stronger, faster from a weight room perspective. You get a chance to take some cool electives that you may not have had the chance to take at your old school, and challenge yourself academically. But the biggest thing is that independence, and gaining that confidence to be able to go into college a year later.
Anything to add, Richard, on that? Because from your perspective at Mercersburg?
Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there. I think academically as well, we always say students are able to take a bigger course load for a fifth year, and help colleges kind of look at that. We see a ton of kids that are similar to what Tanner just said, just not mature enough to go into college, and they recognize it, their family recognizes it. Um, they kind of feel as though they're doing their child a disservice by just sending them away to college without any sort of experience of living by themselves. Some of the kids here, they've never even been to summer camp. They've never been away from their families for more than 2 nights. So coming into a boarding school and getting like your foot in the door and understanding, okay, like time management. When do I do my laundry? How do I reach out to a teacher? How do I appropriately send an email to a faculty member? All of those different things you kind of learn throughout your PG year. Um, Especially, here at Mercersburg, we only have 10 to 15 kids that come in for a postgraduate year. So you get to make those connections with those kids too and see that, you're not just by yourself.
Yeah. So kind of thinking of more, I guess, logistically, right? Like walking us through that internal timeline of a student and family. Okay, I'm thinking about, I'm not exactly sure. I might have a couple of colleges would maybe like, it's very kind of ill-defined, right? You have some options, but you're not entirely happy with them. What does that kind of application process look like for postgrad students in terms of like the timeline, but also are there any differences in that application versus other boarders or day students?
Yeah, I can start just from New Hampton's perspective on like it's the same application steps that any 9 through 12 student would take. I think that the biggest difference, and this is more from the student side of things and the family side, is like the timeline is different, and I think there's a lot of deadlines and information within boarding school world that's shifting and evolving. It's harder, I think, for a college, or excuse me, for a kid in their senior year because a lot of them are applying ED and early action to all these places. They're hearing by December, and the majority of prep schools they're sending out decisions in February 1st, essentially. Kind of or the deadlines around that time, and they're hearing in March, so it's quite delayed. I think what we've tried to do is combat that a little bit with an earlier action process where some of those post grad type kids can have apples to apples and compare the what they were receiving from a college, and then also what they're getting from us in terms of decision, because that can make that process a little bit easier. But in terms of the strict application, like it's the same process in terms of the amount of essays you're writing, the amount of recs you need from your teachers, interview process, come to campus, check everything out. So it's the same thing for all students, 9 through 12 in PG.
And I guess the reason why it seems like athletes is kind of disproportionately do PG years is because, like what you mentioned, those timelines don't always sync up, right? So if you're thinking about trying to commit, let's put that in quotes, to a college, right? We know verbal versus non-verbal, it's like law, right? You want to have everything in writing. So you're getting these verbal commitments late spring all the way through the summer of your rising senior year. And after that, the top flight programs, unless they're looking to kind of build their benches, they're pretty much done, right? So you'll know pretty early, so now you can kind of recalibrate. So I guess it makes sense why they could look at PGs because they may not get the information they like now, but they feel like if I have another year, I can kind of develop from there academically, physically, things like that. So it's the same thing with Mercersburg in terms of the application components being the same. It's just more about the timeline differences.
Yeah, the application is the same, just as Tanner said, as any 9th through 12th grade student. Letters of recommendation, student essays, transcripts, that sort of thing. We also kind of a little bit different. We see a lot of kids coming through later in the springtime, maybe like right before we're about to release our decisions, or March, April, students that are getting to the end of their senior year and they're like, oh man, like I really thought I would
Mhm.
be in a
Yeah.
different position right now. And then they're kind of they feel as though they're scrambling. So we have seen that over the past few years, and are able to kind of bake in those numbers and be like, we know we'll probably get at least a couple of PGs throughout the summer. Sometimes it's different. Sometimes we're fully enrolled and we have to turn those PGs away, but we do see a handful of PGs come through in the summer, and parents are always like very nervous, or they're like, oh, we missed the process, we missed the boat. And that's in a lot of places it's not the case.
It's
We
almost kind of
also
like a wait list, but without the actual decision component. Like you think about, you see in the news about these schools are admitting these kids from the
Mhm.
wait list, like very reputable colleges admitting, oh, by
Yeah.
the way, we admitted 150 kids on our wait list, and it was right before, literally right before school started, right? So it's almost
Yeah.
that same kind of scrambling, and we know admissions can be pretty malleable in terms of deadlines, decisions, all that fun stuff. So that kind of makes sense. You brought that up.
Yeah, we also Mercersburg, and I think a lot of other boarding schools, specifically in New England, work with the Naval Academy. We have foundation students where
Mm.
they
Yeah.
essentially are qualified enough to get into the Naval Academy. They might just not have space for that year. Um, and the Naval Academy will essentially send them to Mercersburg, and that usually happens throughout the summer. So we usually have anywhere from 5 to 10 postgrads that are committed to Navy, and they're usually phenomenal kids, right? They're service academy kids that are, going to fight for our country, and they're usually phenomenal community members as well.
So I guess let's flash or fast forward a bit until to the time that they're actually on campus, right? I think Tanner, you and I might have talked offline about it's likening to a transfer student, right? They're only here for a finite amount of time. So when you have these students, and it's a not insignificant portion of a class, right, that's coming in just for 1 year, there's always the question of how do they fit in, for lack of a better term, with the rest of the school community? So can you kind of walk us through what that process is like, integration between the PG students as well as the boarding and day, and in terms of like, are there different resources allocated for PGs, or is it like the application, which it's the same thing, so they're just kind of included with the rest of the community?
Yeah, sort of similar to Richard a little bit in terms of that like amount of students. So you're looking at anywhere from, 10 on the low side, 15, maybe 16, 17 students on the high side of total postgrads on campus. Um, and that's just more because I think we're seeing less of them overall, but also like really trying to make sure we're accounting for everybody and also give them kind of what you said, give them the same type of resources and outcomes. So when a kid is coming, they're coming to New Hampton in the fall. We are going through and making sure throughout the summertime that we're building out their schedule, we're setting up meetings with their advisors, and really, I think the college counselor having communication throughout the summer with them because they haven't had that extra added year of really looking at creating a school list and having a lot of back and forth dialogue that you typically have in your junior year as you go into senior year. So we're trying to play catch up in that summer so we can hit the ground running come fall, come August. So it's really trying to establish like, okay, why are you here? Why are you doing the post grad? What are your priorities? Where are your focuses? And then kind of create that school list from that perspective. But I think the advisor is also key just because everybody's nervous. The students nervous, mom and dad are nervous. And so I think it's really just making sure that they transition well, placement in terms of where they're going in the dorm, like all that stuff. Kind of admissions has some influence, not influence, but input on that as we place them in the right dorms. And hey, your roommate may not be the kid that's your teammate, but maybe they play another sport and they're on the same type of track as you. They have a similar schedule as you. So we're making conscious decisions that, we want to make sure even though it's 1 year, it's a good experience in that 1 year and making sure you have all the same resources in terms of the strength coach, the academic support essentials, so you are part of that senior class. It's just the fact that you're coming in for that 1 year, as opposed to maybe a senior who's been here multiple years.
Yeah, we're very similar. We kind of loop all of our post grads into the senior class. They're taking a lot of the advanced classes that the seniors are taking at that time. Our college counselors have a big hand in the admissions process as well. They're making sure that they're reading the file of the student, and seeing like, is this a student that we can legitimately support here at Mercersburg, whether that's academically, athletically, emotionally, all of those different components. So our college counseling office has a pretty big part of helping the students from the minute that they apply, essentially all the way through the process. But in terms of like programming or specific things that we do for postgrads, I wouldn't say that there's anything different that we do outside of being just a 12th grader.
Okay, great. So I guess shifting gears just a little bit to that other, I guess, non-traditional enrollment, I guess, decision, right? Reclassification or repeating. So going back to my personal experience being from Texas, there was oftentimes a stigma associated with it because we didn't have kids that reclass, they were held back. So just the difference in language and word choice. So I didn't hear about this until I was back at F&M where I worked with a lot of kids from the Northeast and New England especially where this is not an uncommon thing. So when someone decides to reclassify or repeat, how exactly is that different than PG or in terms of the not only obviously it's a different phase in their I guess the process, but the mindset of deciding to do that as opposed to just doing the 4 years and going to PG. So what would make a student want to reclass as opposed to just waiting until they've done their 4 years and then just opt for the post grad option?
Yeah, I'd love to start. I think both are positive options, by the way. Like, I think that's one thing that I'll often get from families is like, hey, is it better to reclass or is it better to kind of go through, graduate, and then PG? I think both are like are really positive opportunities for kids. It's just a matter of, I think, what fits best for the actual family. So yeah, I mean, repeating your year typically had a negative stigma, I think, from a public school space. But um, I think that kids, who um, are needing a smaller environment. I think we see it a lot with kids who are coming from larger public schools, over 1,000 kids, 30 kids in a classroom. I don't do well in big environments. I need a place where it's a little bit smaller, where I can really build a connection with the faculty members. Um, and needing that fresh start. I think that's the one thing. I think we also see the kid who is not getting the opportunity programmatically at the current school that they are at. And it is a bit of a time clock. You only have so much time in terms of if you're an athlete trying to get film, or if you're a guitar player and you're trying to, or some you play some instrument, you're trying to get more exposure and experience in the arts. So I think opportunity is also a big factor when it comes to the pluses of reclassing. I think you get to be within that community a bit longer. I think we love the impact of a kid who's here for 1 year post grad and leaves and goes out and does something great in the school they leaves to afterwards. But we also love getting kids for as long as we can at a place like New Hampton. And so I think it incentivizes you being able to be a part of the community a little bit longer, to build deeper connections with the kids that you're going to school with, and really extend out that experience overall.
Yeah, I would say kind of echo exactly what Tanner just said. We always tell families when they're coming through the process and they ask about a reclassification year, to just have a reason and an understanding on why. Some families will come in and they're like, we want to our son wants to reclass because his friend did. It's really not a great reason. If there's a reason for it, if he maybe didn't do as well as he should have done his ninth grade year, and needs to really boost his grades, or if he maturity wise needs an extra year to develop athletically, if there's a reason for like maturing physically and emotionally. Those are valid reasons. There's also a huge misconception that families that apply for ninth grade will have a better chance of getting accepted. However, percentage wise, right, you have a lot of kids applying for ninth grade. There's a lot more spots. You have a couple spots in 10th grade, but there's also not as many people applying for 10th grade year. So statistically, it's the same acceptance rate. But families have this misconception of like they have to repeat their ninth grade year because there's a better chance that they're going to get accepted to the school. When in reality, it's very similar whether it's ninth, 10th, or 11th grade. The acceptance rates fairly similar overall.
And I guess I can kind of share from the college admission side. When we would review applications and we saw there was a student that either PG'd or reclassified, we hardly thought of it unless there was a specific reason that made us go, why did they do that in the first place? Like if there's a huge drop off in grades or there's a personal behavioral issue, But other than that, we saw a bunch of these kids that made those choices, and we just read it like anyone else, right? So I think there's another kind of anxiety inducing part of this is, oh, if I do a PG year, that means I don't know what I want to do, which makes me seem not desirable by colleges because I don't have everything planned out. Well, no, that's not how it works because most of these schools understand that you should have everything figured out when you're 17 years old, right? So I just want to kind of include the college perspective on it's not a stigma either. So just don't feel like you need to avoid that because you're worried about what people will be reviewing applications will think going forward. So before we kind of wrap things up, so I was wondering if you can kind of offer us the students and families on this that are viewing this video, what advice do you have for them if they are looking at either a PG year or looking to reclassify? Anything specific from your personal experience or your professional experience to kind of guide them through that decision-making process?
Yeah, I would say do as much research as possible. If you have the opportunity to visit campuses, I would say do that as well. Every single school, boarding schools are similar in a lot of ways, where the faculty and staff and kids live on campus, but every single school is just so different. There's different atmospheres, there's different literal campuses, like the physical plant, the buildings, different sports teams, all of these different things that come into play. And if you're, not only serious about reclassifying or doing a PG year, or just looking at boarding school, just do your research. Don't just go on a niche and take it for face value and say like, okay, like these are the top 20 schools in the country. Let's apply to those schools, right? Those schools are great in their own respective way, but they might not be the best fit for your child. A student who comes to Mercersburg might be very different than a student who comes to New Hampton, but they're all looking for different avenues. We offer a lot of the same things, but we're very different in a lot of ways. So just do as much research as possible. And ask hard questions. Ask the admissions counselors hard questions. Come up with difficult questions and questions that you feel as though are important to you, and make sure you get them answered.
Yeah, I would echo a lot of kind of what Richard said there. And I think the ask difficult questions is something that I wish I did more of when I was going through the process too. Like, I think I was the kid who was just like, nope, I want this is what I want. Yeah, like I'm set. I don't have any questions. And I think kids really should dive in and really get the full perspective. I think um try and figure out the types of kids that are within that community. Like, I think one thing that we try and do is connect like our tour guide who gave the tour, with the kid that they were touring. And like we always say, like they're gonna give you their card, reach out to them. So I really would encourage you to connect with those people because those are the types of kids that you're going to school with. So if you start to envision yourself, I think that's a big key. The only other thing I would add is like you're probably going into this because you have some sort of hook, um, whether it's in most times it's programmatically. And I know we always kind of gravitate towards student athletes, but I think there's a lot of growth and a lot of different kids throughout the world that can utilize a post grad year or a reclass year in this boarding school environment. And part of that is like whoever that program leader is going to be that um, is going to be your go-to person. Like make sure you have a good connection and relationship with them as you're starting to envision yourself at that particular school.
Okay, great. It's a great place to end on. So, on behalf of Richard, Tanner, and myself, thank you for tuning in to the session and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.